Hey everybody. Today we're going to be walking through Apollo client schemas. What that is, it's a simple way to build up a prototype. It kind of lets you define your graph schema, define your resolvers, your queries, your mutations, all of that stuff on the client without having to build out a server. And it's a really good way to quickly get a prototype up and do a lot of the kind of plumbing and wiring up work that you normally would have to do, that you'd have to do anyway, but you don't have to worry about spinning up a server. So before we get started, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and you'll get notified about future videos from our team. All right, let's do it. So here's our little app that we're building our prototype for. It's very simple. It's just going to show our IP address and then some information about where we live. So what drives that is also very simple. It's just two files. We've got our app.js, which kind of serves our application. In this case, it just has one component called IP info. If you're familiar with Create React App, you'll be familiar with the setup. If not, that's okay. It's pretty basic. And here is our IP info component. All we're doing is we're just building some static data, our IP address, our city, our country, and then just population data. And then all we're doing is displaying it on our page. So that's kind of the gist of our application. Now we could take this and we could take it to a stakeholder and we could show them, our prototype here. But if we knew we were going to use GraphQL as our backend and we wanted to get a little bit more work done, we could go ahead and set up Apollo client. So let's do that. Just for the sake of time, I've done this ahead of time, so I'm going to copy paste and then we'll step through. So this is before Apollo and this is after. So if we look now, we're importing some things from Apollo client that we need. We are creating an instance of Apollo client. This is what's going to wrap all the Apollo stuff that we like and need. And the URI here is just taken from their documentation. URI is required when setting up an Apollo client, but we're not actually going to use anything from this schema. And then we're setting up a cache as an in-memory cache. And here we're passing down Apollo provider. That is a context that wraps all of the functionality of Apollo. And then we've just got our same IP info component there. So if we refresh, we're going to need to restart here. There we go. So we'll notice that nothing changed. And the reason that is because if we look back at what we actually did, we didn't really tell our app anything about our schema or anything about our client. All we did was connect to a client. So we have a client that's connected, but it doesn't actually do anything. So what we need now is some types. So if we add some types, it'll kind of tell our client what we're working with here. So again, we're going to do our magic copy paste. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So now if we look at these type defs, if you're familiar with GraphQL, you know that GraphQL has a schema, and a schema is defined by types. And we're just, on the client, all we're doing is extending what we would be getting from the server. So we're extending our query type with a client query, which will get a little confusing in a minute, but we'll get through it. And then we have an IP address type, a city type, a country type, and then we are passing those type defs into Apollo client. So we can refresh again, but we're still not really going to get anything. And the reason for that is we're not actually doing anything different here. We're still just serving static data. So we're going to paste in, our IP info component here. That didn't work. There we go. All right, so we'll take a little bit of time to look at this because it's changed a little bit. So the first thing we're doing is we're pulling in some things from call client, some tools that we're going to need. Our use query hook, which queries the database and returns us, or queries the graph schema and returns us some data. And then GQL is a helper that we can use to quickly define graph queries and types. So here is our client query, and this is where it gets a little confusing. So the name of our query is called client, and then we have a directive here that is also called client. So we've got clients on clients on clients here. The client directive just tells Apollo, hey, this schema exists on the client, not the server, so don't bother making this request to the server because it's not going to know what you're talking about. We've got it stored here, so serve this. And then that knows to return this stuff. And then our IP info component hasn't changed that much. We are taking our data from this use query here, and then we're destructuring out the data that we need. We did add some loading and error states just so that we have a good user experience while we're waiting on things. And then we're returning the same data. The variable names did change a little bit. So let's see what that did. Now if we refresh, well, now we don't have any data. And why is that? So we can look here, and so we defined a schema that defines the structure of our data, but we didn't actually define what that data should look like or what we should return when someone calls this. So we're just getting back a bunch of undefines and a bunch of nulls. So let's add in some types, some resolvers. Okay. So this resolvers object, if you think about it this way, when you call a query and the query is client, we're going to return this data. So if I make a client query, every time it's going to return this data. We could get fancy with Faker or some other kind of mocking library and return random data, but for now, this is probably fine. This will serve our purpose. It'll get data showing on the screen, and we'll move our app forward a lot further than if we just had a static object. So now let's give that a try. And there we go. It actually already refreshed because of the hot reloading. But now we've got our IP address, got our city, population, country, population, and that is pulling from here, from our Apollo client schema. We hope you found this walkthrough helpful. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you can keep learning and grow with us. And for more resources to help level up your skills, you can head to Headway.io. All right, see you next time.